Big changes in Florida politics this year. Ron DeSantis became governor. He went after everything from the environment to removing the Palm Beach County Supervisor of Elections. A lot of efforts at bipartisanship on certain issues, but a lot of political muscle flexing as well. Talk about Governor DeSantis and how you rate his first year. A lot thought, because he acknowledged that it was President Trump's support that got him into the governor's mansion, thought or were surprised when he came out strong right away on the environment, continue to be with the hundreds of millions he's pushing there. Scorecard the governor's first year.
Well, there was a recent Mason-Dixon poll that showed him having high approval ratings and surprisingly doing well among Democrats. You know, he's been very forceful on the environment, very forceful about the Everglades. You know, he's turned out on some issues to be more moderate than people thought. He's also hardcore conservative on some issues. So, if from
charter schools, for instance.
Sure, and so from a Democratic standpoint, you know, it's not like he's saving the day for them. But yeah, he's turned out to be a far better governor than I think a lot of people thought he was going to be in his first year.
Your scorecard, Mariana?
I give him an A. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
Hey, he has the ability to become the Theodore Roosevelt of Florida, and he's done great things on the environment.
That's some high praise.
He's heading in that direction, and I'm really excited.
Cross-Florida barge canal's coming back.
That's
right. I'm excited about it. And I think that he's also done really well from wanting to hire, you know, a chief scientist to really dig into the Everglades and dig into the climate. And then he's also done excellent things for our school systems and wanting to engage them civically, which is fantastic.
Has not minded flexing raw political muscle. He did it early on, firing the Democratic sheriff of Broward County over the Parkland massacre and the response to it. The Palm Beach County Supervisor of Elections said the sloppiness, his words, of how it was handled, out the door. So when it comes time, he's flexed his muscle.
He's also had a very good working relationship with the legislature so far. They're never going to agree on all the issues, but when you compare it to the 8 years of Rick Scott, who was always at odds with the legislature, he's done much better.
At a recent rally, I covered President Trump. The governor was getting sustained applause, and the president, paraphrasing slightly, said, "Wait a minute, I don't want you more popular than me in Florida." But the governor's popularity could well be the tipping point for the president. He'll have the biggest bully pulpit and megaphone in 2020, and the White House will expect that chit to be repaid, the one of support for DeSantis' candidacy to be repaid in kind and in full. Talk about how he may sway a very tightly clustered election and vote in Florida that way.
I think this is going to be a very fine line that Governor DeSantis is going to have to walk with the president. Because as we've seen, the president has been very strong on issues, and we've seen the governor kind of step back and not really say too much. And so now, when the president does come knocking and say it's time to cash in my card, it's going to be interesting to watch the governor have to walk this fine line of keeping the support in Florida. Scorecard
on Rick Scott, the two-term Republican governor, now junior U.S. Senator from Florida, first year on the job. It's hard in the Senate because of the rules to make a huge impact, but Brian, your take.
You know, before he was announced he was running, I warned him that if he became a United States Senator, he would be bored out of his brain. He would be the junior member, and he wouldn't accomplish a thing while he's there, through no fault of his own. That's the penalty of being a first-year member of the U.S. Senate, which is very hidebound in seniority. I suspect he's bored out of his brain. And, you know, he hasn't accomplished anything, and that's not all his fault. That's the system.
Is it me or Marco Rubio, excuse me, the senior senator now, Republican senator, such a high profile for so long, of course, ran in 2016. That'll amp anybody's profile. Talk about him, where he is now, and kind of the future for Marco Rubio.
Floridians are still asking that question, where Marco Rubio is. We haven't seen or heard much from him lately. He's been very quiet on a lot of issues, and he's just been spending his time on Twitter tweeting Bible verses, which is fantastic.
Why do you think? Why do you think his profile is quieter than it was?
I think because after he lost his run for president, he went back and won and was reelected to the Senate. I think that now the problem is if he comes out, he has to come out in support of the president 110%, and he will not speak out against the president. So therefore, he would rather just keep quiet. And it's unfortunate for all the Floridians here who are hoping he'll get to work for us.
Brian?
I mean, you know, Rubio's never been a profile in courage. You know, so
and how do you mean that? For those who watch and say, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, he hasn't taken on Trump about anything, but you could go prior to that. He wasn't taking anybody on about anything.
Came out hard on an immigration reform charge early on, backed off that.
Yeah, I mean, he announced forcefully that after the end, you know, when he ran for president, that he would not run for another term in the U.S. Senate. And then when he got his head handed to him was, oh, golly shucks, I guess I'll go back to the Senate. I mean, you know, he didn't keep his word then. He doesn't impress me.
And of course, for those of you watching regularly, what have we not talked about in this scorecard? Democrats. Talk about who are the Democratic leaders in the state of Florida? What does it say about the state of the party in Florida, and how do they change that? We talked about it before, talk about it now.
Well, I mean, you know, so far they think the best they have is Andrew Gillum, and that isn't working out too well. You know, I think during the impeachment hearings in the House, somebody who, from a Florida perspective, who looked like he had potential to go further, although I'm not sure he's interested in, is Ted Deutsch. I thought he came across really, really well. He showed some leadership, and you kind of, I remember one time watching him and I'm thinking, you know, if there was a future in the Florida Democratic Party, it should be guys like Ted Deutsch. Unfortunately, I don't think he's interested in doing anything more than what he's doing, but no, there's nobody you really look to and go, there's the future of the Democratic Party.
Mariana?
I would have to agree, and we know that Ted Deutsch was doing a good job for
the Democratic Congressman,
yes,
Boca Raton
Congressman
area.
Ted Deutsch was doing a good job because the Republicans in Palm Beach were taking after him because they were upset about his call for impeachment. So we know that he was doing his job on the partisan lines when he was inciting the Republicans to get super angry at him here locally. But I think also we've seen Lois Frankel, she's been able to carry the water for Nancy Pelosi. But really, to Brian's point, no one is really standing out. Andrew Gillum was supposed to be this rising star after he lost the governor's race, and where is he? Maybe hanging out with Marco Rubio.
He's raising money.
We will be back with closing comments in just a moment.
To the Point with Michael Williams.
The Democrats will be coming to Florida in March for the presidential primary. How many of the current candidates will still be in the race? President Trump looking at beginning the new year with a Senate impeachment trial. How will it affect his run for re-election? Good morning and welcome. Just a couple of the big stories expected to dominate the political headlines in 2020, particularly in a place like battleground Florida, so crucial on any road to the White House. So as we get close to the start of the new year, we're looking at how some of the big issues might play out. We'll look back at some of the highlights or lowlights, depending on your point of view, of the past year. Joining me, our roundtable regulars, Anna Mancuso, Republican political strategist, and News Channel 5 political analyst Brian Crowley. We thank you for being here. So many things that are going to be in the headlines this year. It looks to be, to say the least, one of the more interesting years we may ever have on record, what 2020 will be and how it'll play out. And as part of that, of course, it ultimately comes down to you at home, and the voter registration numbers in Florida speak to how crucial a year it will be in the fight for the Florida vote. Let's look. Here are the number of registered voters in Florida as of October of 2019. 4.7 million Republicans statewide, 4.9 million Democrats, pretty close, 3.6 million with no party affiliation. The no party affiliation we always talk about, roughly about 1 out of every 4 voters, and often the swing votes there. Talk about what stands out to you both about these numbers as we look at this often purple state and what it will portend for President Trump and for other candidates next year for the Democrats seeking to oppose him. Brian?
Well, one of the most notable things about those numbers is, one, the increase in independent voters over the last 20 years has been, they've been skyrocketing in the number of independent voters, which is a way of them saying pox on both your houses. They're not being Republican or Democrat. Another interesting number, though, too, is that the Republicans have significantly closed the gap between the number of Republican voters and Democratic voters. You know, I don't know if that trend is going to continue, but the real big number is independent voters, and you know, there's some talk now about having an open primary where independent voters can vote in the Republican-Democrat primaries, which would dramatically change the elections in Florida.
And so, Mary, keep those numbers up if you can. Those numbers speak to the fact, turnout. Speak to those and how you think that begins to play. Will impeachment be the big driver of the vote? Will it be the economy? Will it be other issues? Will it be the minimum wage question that'll be on the ballot to get people out to vote in this battleground state?
I think that this shows that Florida is a true purple state, right? And it shows that it really could be anyone's bag come the election. But really, when we think about what's the driving force, it's definitely going to be the economy. And as we heard the other week from Congressman Rooney, he pointed out that people vote with their pocketbooks, and that's not wrong. People do, and if the economy keeps going and people are able to continue to keep the lights on and pay their bills, then they're going to be like, you know what, this is great. Let's keep the president in for another 4 years. However, if something happens all it has to do is the economy has to take a dip, or someone, you know, maybe their bills are tight for a few months, then they're going to be like, whoa, wait a minute, and then they're going to think about the impeachment, and there's going to be all these other things they're going to start to notice the red flags.
Talk about that as we set the table for the major issues that will be the drivers next year in the race, Brian.
Well, I mean,
because you both have said to me many times, you think impeachment, we can argue about it as a civics lesson or as a lesson about our Constitution all day long, but you just don't think it's going to be the driver. If you don't see impeachment as the driver, don't want to put words in your mouth, speak to that. What do you see as the things that will push people to Election Day? Well,
I would say that impeachment is the asterisk on the election in 2020. We don't yet really know what impact that's going to have. But yeah, it's always the economy, and now economists have been predicting that 2020 is expected to be a pretty good year, not a great year, but one where people aren't going to have a recession. They're not going to watch they're not necessarily going to lose their jobs, and on and on and on. And I think as long as the economy is healthy, the Democrats have an uphill battle.
Mariana?
And to that point, I think it's also important to note that Trump has actually tied his economy to the stock market. And as long as the stock market continues to do well, which just in full disclosure is not an indicator of economy health. However, because the president has worked really hard to tie himself to the stock market and to Wall Street, as long as it continues to do well, then no one has anything to worry about, because that in his world is the litmus test of how great the economy is doing.
Talk about the presidential primary season. This is always a debate. Who comes first, who comes second? We're a battleground state. We'll be in March. It's after Super Tuesday. Will Florida find itself as being a super asterisk on the primary season with our March date coming after so many other pivotal places? And what does it mean for Democrats campaigning here? Obviously important, but where we are on the calendar is going to be interesting.
Yeah, Florida always struggles for relevance in the primary season, because often by March the candidate is either known or so close to being known we become less relevant. The wild card that we've never seen before in this instance is Michael Bloomberg, who, if you're in Florida, you've seen dozens of commercials that he's done.
$30 million ad campaign.
He's skipping Iowa, he's skipping New Hampshire, he's skipping South Carolina. He's waiting for Super Tuesday, which is before Florida's March 17th primary. If he's able to kind of just throw everything topsy-turvy, if nobody clearly comes out of Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, and Nevada as the front runner, Florida could be really important.
We'll see. And he continues to pour tons of money in the campaign. He's not busted out of single digits yet in any early polling, but we'll see how that plays out. I want to move a little bit. In the 2016 election, the Mueller report said the Russians were able to hack the voting systems in at least one Florida county, not named. It said there were no signs the election results were compromised. Talk about voting integrity and how you think that plays into concerns. And as we go to the polls next year, certainly the Republicans, certainly the president's brought it up, certainly others will too, but it is a real concern in this cyber world. Mariana?
I think that voter integrity is always an issue on the election. It's not just that there was an issue of one of our counties being hacked. It's always a concern, and people are always wondering, well, how do I know that my vote's being counted? How do I know that it's being collected and done, appropriated to where I need it to be? And I think that we're going to continue to talk about that, especially as there is just big tech movement all over the space in the elections that we saw from 2016, a little bit of 2018, and now we even see Facebook and Twitter cracking down on their political ads and things like that.
And to both of you, speaking of that, concerns about, being able to co-opt what we see on social media, that those intent on subverting our elections can influence it through Facebook ads, Twitter accounts, stealing emails, even these virtual identity profiles that make you think you're looking at a candidate. In reality, it was all make-believe. We face challenges that none of us could have imagined years ago, Brian. How do we inoculate ourselves as voters with all the tsunami of information coming at us, to parse through it, to have a clear understanding of what the real vital issues are, and then make judgments accordingly? It's becoming increasingly hard.
Yeah, I'm tempted to say you can't fix stupid, but I'm going to resist saying that.
What do you mean by that? No, you threw that out. What do you mean?
Well, like not too long ago, I saw this posting on Facebook of a Mark Twain quote. In the 30 seconds it took me to check the Mark Twain quote, it's not a Mark Twain quote. And it was geared to politics. And I'm like, people don't even check things that they post themselves, where in a minute they can determine whether or not something is accurate. There's a certain laziness involved. There's a certain, as long as I hear something that I agree with, by God, I'm going to push it out there. Things get accepted as fact just because it's on Facebook or on Twitter or on some other part of social media. And We need people to take a deep breath, pause, and actually establish something as a fact before they push it out. The rest of the world of attack media, whether it's from our friends in Russia or other countries, that's an enormous problem, and I don't know how we get around that.
Mariana?
Well, to Brian's point, I overheard the other day on the radio that this person was talking about social media, and they were saying one of the blessings of social media was that it actually removed the intermediary and that people could go out and tout their own information. And he was going on about how fantastic this was, and the only thing I could think of was how terrifying this was, that there wasn't an ability to fact check, and literally you can get on social media and say anything, and the fact is you'll find other people who share those viewpoints, and that is the most terrifying point.
Let's talk about voting segments. We've had millennial guests in here, very engaged in trying to get out the millennial vote, all the way to baby boomers. Millennials rival them now. One of the interesting things next year, we'll see voter enthusiasm. Will millennials get out and vote? Where will their vote be? Will they see enthusiasm in the Democratic ranks? Talk about those two very disparate voting blocs, and certainly both well represented in Florida, and how you think that'll play out, Mariana.
I think that you're going to see a lot of enthusiasm surrounding issues. We know that the millennial vote is really concerned about things like student loan debt. They're concerned about climate change. They have these problems that they want addressed, and they want them addressed now. And so when they find the candidate that will address those issues and has the solution, not just says that there's a problem, but has the solution, I think we'll start to see a lot of enthusiasm for those candidates.
Well, like all groups, I'm always reluctant to lump them all together. And you know, in mid-December, just before Christmas, there was a big gathering of young Republicans, and they heard from Sean Hannity and all the really hardcore, you know, and these are not, these young Republicans who are also millennials, they're not fighting for climate change, they're not fighting for all the things. I mean, again, they're just like their elders. They're divided, they're hardcore in what they believe in, and they don't compromise. So I'm not like, oh gosh, millennials are going to save the day. I don't necessarily buy that.
No, I don't think they will. They'll sit on the couch and hope somebody else does it first.
You, when we talk a lot off camera, we always talk about thinking outside the box. It's hard to fight the conventional wisdom of what's going on. What's an out-of-the-box thought you want voters to be thinking about as they look at next year, about what they should be thinking about that perhaps is not part of the daily mix of our discussion? You chat with us about this all the time off camera, as do you, Mariana. Your thoughts, Brian?
Well, I think one issue that I wish everybody would talk about a little bit more is what I predict as baby boomers get into their late 70s and 80s, and we're going to see millions and millions and millions, and a number we've never seen in our history before, of elderly baby boomers. Most of them are going to be poor because they don't have the savings and the pension plans. Most of them are going to be in poor health. A good chunk of the Florida population is that. I don't hear anybody talking about how we're going to cope with it. And who will that burden fall on? It will fall on the millennials and others. So I wish our politicians, both on a national level and especially on a state level in Florida, would start looking at those things, because that's a train wreck that you can see coming, and it's not that far away.
Mariana?
Well, and to Brian's point, train wrecks that we see coming is another one is the climate crisis. I mean, that is a train wreck that is impending. And if we don't do something now, then it's going to be too late. And I don't believe that we saw in the debate the other week, the Democrat presidential debate, they were talking about the climate crisis, and they were saying, well, we have this whole plan for relocation assistance. The fact of the matter is people who live on coastal cities really don't want to relocate to places like Oklahoma. They're on a coastal city because it's a coastal city, and I think we need to start taking that seriously. And another thing to that point is the reality that there are more plastic flamingos in this world than actual flamingos. What does that tell us about our environment and the climate in which they live?
Which issues will motivate us to the poll? Which might find in a Democrat the person who might be most electable to the people to whom those issues are important, and for the president as well. Of course, for him, they've already made clear in the White House, the economy, the economy, the economy. It's going to be an interesting year. We'll have more from both of you when we come back. A look and a scorecard of sorts for some of the state's most powerful politicians and how they're set up for next year. Drum roll, our final closing comments for 2019, the Mancuso moment.
Well, 2019 has brought in a lot of history. We had our third impeachment, unfortunately, for America, but we also saw a lot of vibrancy among people wanting to run for office, and I look forward to 2020, and I look forward to hearing more about the issues and our candidates and celebrating the Iowa caucuses with you here in Florida and New Hampshire, and just the entire 2020 election. I'm just super excited for a new year and a new decade.
2020, here we are, the Crowley closer.
I think we should enter the new year with more of us thinking about some of the the rest of the world where there are really, really serious day-to-day problems, and then maybe look in the mirror and go, gosh, we really don't have it so bad, and maybe we can stop yelling at each other about everything. And when you think about the things we fight over, you know, they're pretty simple problems compared to what's going on in much of the rest of the world. So if we could be a little nicer to each other when we're talking about politics, it might help. And I'd just like to do a shout out to all my fellow New Year's birthday babies. Happy birthday.
That's right. That's right. He'll be 29.
Exactly.
Happy 2020 to all of you, and of course to all of you at home. And thank you as always for spending time with us on today's To The Point. If you'd like to send us your comments about the broadcast, please go to WPTV.com, click on the To The Point page. We'll have a section to send us your views. We wish you a great 2020. Looking forward to the politics of the coming year. Enjoy the rest of your day.